Hi, folks. Welcome to Great Ed's Legislative Recap and Ballot Preview. We're going to give folks just a few minutes to get logged on. We are recording this event this evening so we can share it out afterwards. And so just if you are hearing that prompt, if you could click to confirm for us that we're okay to record the meeting, that would be great. And we're going to give folks just a couple minutes to log in. So thanks so much for joining us. Great to see some familiar names and some familiar faces, and also new names and new faces. Excited to have folks with us tonight. We have folks hopping into the waiting room, letting them in. While we have folks logging in, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, you should have the ability to enter a message for everyone. And if you could include your name, where you're zooming in from, that would be great. Your name and where you're zooming in from. And we'll get started in just a couple minutes. If you want to put in the chat your name, pronouns, and where you are joining us from, zooming in from today. My name is Cody. I'm the Director of Organizing here with Great Ed and zooming in from Denver. Great. We're going to give folks just one more minute. Awesome. If you could introduce yourself, let folks know who you are, your name, your pronouns, and where you're zooming in from. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, folks. As we have others join us, they'll be popping in. But one thing that I want to start us off with today is we are hoping to have some opportunities to do some polling and some interactive Q&A throughout this event through a platform called Slido. One of the things that we really like about Slido is that it has the opportunity to do, again, both polls and Q&A. And so to start off, we're going to have, there's two ways to find us on Slido tonight. One, you can either go to slido.com on another tab or on a smart device, maybe your iPad. And if you go to that website, there will be a place to put in a code. And the code for this meeting is right here on the screen, 805281. Nicole Shea, our wonderful Director of Operations, is also going to put a link in the chat. And if you click on that, it should take you to this meeting as well. When you log into Slido, you'll see two tabs. The first tab is going to be a polling tab, and we at Great Ed want to make sure that in the spirit of grassroots organizing and grassroots work, start off every opportunity that we have to share with you with some listening. And so we have some questions that we'd like to kick off, and we're going to use Slido for some of that polling. And then we also have an opportunity, if you click on the Q&A tab, you'll be able to, throughout the presentation, type in any questions that you might have. And as you see questions coming into that queue, you'll be able to see what other people's questions are as well. And if you like another participant's question, you can hit that like button on their question, and that'll actually upvote their question up the list. And so if you see a question that someone else asked that you also want to hear the answer to, definitely make sure you hit that like button so that when we get to the Q&A portion at the end of tonight, we'll be able to see what the most popular questions are, so we can start with those questions first. I'm seeing some folks have already had the opportunity to hop in and start sharing on that first poll, which I'm excited for. So I'm going to switch over and start showing off some of these responses. The first question is, we'd love to get a sense of what perspectives you're bringing into the room tonight. And you should be able to select as many as possible that reflect you. And so if you want to take a moment to just let us know what perspectives you're bringing into the room, community member, educators, we have some elected officials who've joined us. Thanks so much for being here. Great. I'll give folks just a couple more minutes to get logged in and share that with us. We got about 35 folks with us tonight and about 13 folks who've had the chance to answer. What perspectives are you going to bring to this conversation this evening? So, got folks getting logged in. And the two ways to join, either finding that link to the Slido in the Zoom chat, or you can join us by going to slido.com, and this code right here, 805-281, will connect you to the group. As we start thinking about and reflecting on the end of this legislative session and start to preview where we're headed for this fall's election in 2021 and some ideas of where we might head in 2022, would love to hear from you all and just get some of your perspectives. And this next question will be an open response, so you can type in your response on your smartphone or on your computer. And that question is, what are you most excited about for this upcoming school year? What are you most excited about for this upcoming school year?
Stop the video.
Absolutely.
No, unmuted.
Great. That person-to-person opportunity. I'm such an extrovert. I'm ready to start seeing people in person again. I'm getting back to a post-COVID normal. Awesome. More mental health supports and resources for our students. Absolutely. Shout out to our partners who are working urgently on that. Getting involved with legislation. Yes, public education voters. We're going to talk about what that looks like to be a public education voter and advocate over the course of this summer and into the fall. So getting involved, love that we're excited to do that. More folks excited about back in person, school in real time, building back better. Yes, student performances. I was definitely a choir kid, a band kid, so I am excited for that as well. School plays, all those extracurricular opportunities for our students. Great. Hopeful to see how technology and mental health supports are better supported and integrated to the everyday for kids and families, right? Like, what did we learn about the power of technology? How can we leverage what we learned to keep some of these supports in place? Great. Yes, more resources for schools, ... for the moment. Great. How about what are you most concerned about for the upcoming school year? What should we be thinking about as advocates, as public education supporters? What are some of the things that might be weighing on your mind? Yes. So hopefully all of our educators are able to take some time, recharge over this summer, right? How we will spend this infusion of resources and stimulus money, who gets to decide? That's huge. Community voice as part of these conversations, new school board elections, how we can work across the state, especially in rural districts, absolutely. Making up for learning time, unfinished learning, right? Well, thank you so much for sharing and having this opportunity to be able to just hear from you what perspectives you bring to this conversation tonight, some of the things you're excited about, some of the things that you want to be thinking about and advocating for as public education voters and advocates. And what I'm going to do is kick it over now to Ben and Lisa, who are going to share a little bit about what happened during this most recent legislative session when it comes to school funding.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Robinson. I am the Communications and Public Affairs Coordinator at Great Ed. And we are going to tell you a little bit about the actions we took this legislative session. Obviously, we didn't have a physical presence at the Capitol, and thus our advocacy was quite a bit different this year than it normally is. I was at the Capitol some last year, and we also had another member of our team at the Capitol as well. Could you do next slide, Nicole? Just to give you sort of a brief overview of what has gone on in this past year, this past legislative session. The state funding rebounded from 2020. Long-time erosion of local shares was reversed. Federal funding has provided a bridge to future. Renewed interest in making the School Finance Act more equitable, which is critically important for solving the big systemic issues that we face. The legislature has altered the ballot process, and then we have the opportunity to make COVID Colorado's turning point. Next. So let me get this little picture out of my site. There we go. One of the first things we did was we kept the appropriation for the 20 or helped keep, we did not ourselves, but through advocacy, helped keep the 2021 appropriation for school funding whole. We did this by meeting with the Joint Budget Committee as a coalition, our Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition. And then we also developed a petition that we sent around for a few weeks, and we garnered over 1,100 signatures from all around the state, and we were able to present that to the Joint Budget Committee. And in the end, the state legislature did maintain the fiscal year 2021 funding and held harmless any districts that had enrollment reductions. So that was sort of the big question here, is because of COVID and some of the effects of COVID, a lot of districts around the state saw a decrease in enrollment, but that doesn't mean that those districts need less funding. So this effort was to keep the funding that was already promised in spite of that decrease in enrollment. Next. The next one is something I mentioned on the first slide, which was transparency in ballot measures. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, when you get your ballot and it has either a revenue increase or a tax cut on it, there's a ton of text there. It's often in all capital letters, and it's pretty hard to make sense of. And because voters in this state are tasked with making tax policy in the form of taxes on the ballot, they need the whole picture, right? They need to know all the facts before they make a vote, and in order to make an informed vote. So HB 21-1321 did pass. So it creates requirements for ballot measures to reflect how a change in revenue, specifically decreases, affect different local or state programs, right? So it tells you, I believe it's the top 3 programs impacted. Again, our advocates were wonderfully helpful with this. We created an action online and sent it out to them, and they made sure that 466 individual emails were sent to state representatives, senators, and Governor Polis. It's currently awaiting the governor's signature, but it successfully passed both houses. And so there was one provision that we really would have liked to have in there, but that didn't happen, and that was the sort of comparative, or this, it was a table function essentially, that showed voters in a visual form exactly how a tax change would affect them. So for example, in the bottom here, this is something like you would have seen on the ballot had this provision been included in it. So you can see on the left column, you have the income category. So for example, up to $15,000, and the average annual tax change, which is $1, all the way up to 1 million and above. Over there on the bottom right, which Nicole is circling with her mouse, and you can see the change there is a lot higher. It's 2,181. Now, just because we didn't get this in here this time doesn't mean we're going to stop working for it. And this is something that we're going to keep plugging for next legislative session, because we think this is crucial to letting voters know what all they're voting on when it comes to tax policy. And I'm going to hand it over to Lisa.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Ben. So it falls on me to talk about what happened in school funding this year. It was a pretty eventful year, actually. We have on the Zoom call tonight one of the authors of a lot of the more beneficial things that happened in school finance, Senator Rachel Zenzinger, the chair of the Senate Education Committee, is with us. So I'm going to do the top line so we have time for questions, and we'll make sure that Senator Zenzinger has an opportunity to make sure that I got this right. The first thing is the budget stabilization factor. That's always sort of the biggest measure for how we did in a budget year. The budget stabilization factor, or BS factor, as we like to call it, and we're grateful that they gave us that opportunity. That is simply a measure of how far behind we are in funding now than we would have been going back to before the recession, when you take into account inflation and the growth in the number of students. So BS factor, just how far behind are we from the buying power that our schools had back in 2009. And the good news is that this year they reduced that budget, the BS factor, by $479 million. Nicole Shea, if you can go to the next slide. This is what that looks like. So the good news is that that $479 million was, the budget stabilization factor was reduced by that much, but as you can see, it's because it grew by $479 million in 2020. And so where we are now is exactly where we were in 2019, which is almost $600 million, or about more than $600 per pupil behind what we were spending in 2009, which was not adequate at that time. So really grateful that we were able to get that back. But we have to remember that where we sit historically, so far behind. Now, it's important to talk about, Ben said that the one of the big picture items is that the federal stimulus money really helped us bridge for these years. If it weren't for this federal stimulus dollars, those cuts going to a BS factor of 1.1 billion would have been devastating. But now we've got these federal dollars. They're being spent to pay more teachers and to pay teachers more for mental health supports, for summer school, for technology, et cetera. And that is a remarkable opportunity for us at this point. But those dollars all have to be spent by 2024. And so that's something we need to consider. Next slide, please, Nicole Shea. So getting back to this list, the next advance was House Bill 1164. So as many of you know, most of our school funding comes from a combination of local plus state share. And for the past 40 years, there have been formulas in place in our Constitution and in our statutes that have eroded local funding for schools. It's completely by autopilot. School districts didn't choose to do it. It's just what these formulas were doing. So the worst part of that is that the way the formulas worked, or what the one particularly that was addressed by this bill, the school districts that had the fastest growing property wealth were the ones where the property rates, the property tax rates were reduced. The mill levies were reduced by formula simply because their property wealth was growing. And so that was going on for the whole thing for about 17 years. No, I take that back, 27 years. HB 1164 is going to reduce the erosion of the local share. It's going to start adding that back over the next almost 2 decades. It passed the legislature after the Supreme Court. The legislature asked the Supreme Court, is this constitutional? And the Supreme Court said yes. The result of that is that there's more local funding coming in this year, building back what had eroded before. And that means that keeping the same amount of state funding means that there's more state funding that can be applied to school finance. And so what the School Finance Act did this year was take the money resulting from 1164 and that increase in local share and applied it to they first set the negative factor again, the BS factor at 572 million, but then there was this additional $77 million available. And what the legislature did is say, we need to spend that money more equitably. Equitably meaning we know that in order to meet the needs of students with special needs, with special education needs, gifted and talented, growing up in poverty, learning English, that those students need additional assistance. And our School Finance Act right now doesn't do as good a job as it needs to in addressing those needs. So this $77 million in additional funding goes to students who are at risk. Now, at risk in Colorado, there has been a factor, an additional amount of money given to districts based on the number of kids who are at risk. And unlike every other state or most other states, Colorado has defined that as free kids who are eligible for free lunch. So they expanded that to free and reduced lunch. And the other thing was to add a factor for the first time for emerging bilingual students. And what that indicates is a real desire to make our School Finance Act more equitable. And that led to House Bill 1325, which establishes another School Finance Interim Committee. There have been a lot of them. And this one will be looking specifically at how should we define at risk? Is there a better proxy than free and reduced lunch? And how better can we fund the needs of special education students? They'll be doing a lot of investigation, some studies, and we'll be keeping you all informed about those and asking for you to give input to that committee as it goes along. The last thing is the TABOR surplus outlook. And this just came to light in the degree to which TABOR is kicking in, just came to light last week when the forecasts of the economy came out, and we're in a V economy. The economy dropped, but we are growing back very quickly. And as a lot of you know, and go to the next slide if you would, please, Nicole Shea. One of the formulas in our Constitution, the TABOR, which was passed in 1992, basically put our tax system in the Constitution, which is why, as Ben pointed out, the voters are the ones who ultimately make the changes. So what we have here in this graph is the blue is the amount that the legislature that the state is allowed to keep under TABOR. TABOR has a limit on how much the state can keep. So as you can see, in the year that's the fiscal year that starts on Thursday, July 1st, we're expecting as much as $700 million in excess of that limit. That's $700 million that, based on our current tax system, that the current very low, nationally low tax rates that we have $700 million that could be spent to reduce the BS factor, or to increase the emerging bilinguals factor, or for paying teachers more, for housing. $700 million is going to come in because our economy is doing well, that will have to be rebated back to taxpayers. And the way it works, those with the most money are going to get the most back. So it is a troubling future for our budget and for our schools. And I would just point out again, as I mentioned, that our federal dollars have to be spent by the end of 2024. And at that time, if nothing happens, if the voters aren't given a chance to do something, in that same year when we're done with the federal dollars, we will be returning $1.1 billion, mostly to the wealthiest, or those who can afford it best. We will be returning that instead of making those kinds of expenditures in the future of our students. And so that brings us to the ballot preview, and I'll turn it back over to Cody.
Wonderful. So again, if any of what Lisa or Ben just shared sparked some questions for you, would love to see what those questions might be. And so feel free to add those to the Slido if you have some questions about what you just heard. But hoping to kind of answer a question that might already be in your head. So what's happening next? Where is the fight for public education funding going? And first, we want to talk about a couple things that you are going to start hearing about. Actually, right before this started, I was at the grocery store and was asked to sign a petition for something called Initiative 27, which is a property tax reduction that's seeking to make its way onto the 2021 November ballot. What that ballot initiative says is that it would reduce the residential assessment rate from 7.15% to 6.5%, and the non-residential rate from 29% to 26.4%. What this essentially means is that there would be about $1 billion that could be lost, according to how this ballot was written, and about $250 million of that would be a reduction from schools. Just to put that number in context, Colorado currently ranks 48th of states in the country in how little we collect in property taxes. So any reductions to the property tax rate would continue to create an underfunded school system here in Colorado. Another ballot initiative that you might hear about that we would want to encourage you to decline to sign as well is Initiative 31, which would be an income tax reduction from 4.55% to 4.4%. Earlier, Ben told you about a bill that passed through the legislature that changed the rules on how ballot language would need to reflect reductions to state taxes. Both of these ballot measures were approved under the title board before those new rules would take place. And so we're concerned that these are going to look really attractive for folks and continue to be something that takes money out of our public school system. And Colorado currently ranks 45th in income taxes in the state, in the country as well. And so as you might be doing your grocery shopping or out in community, and you might have folks coming up to you and asking you to sign some petitions. If you hear the number 27, if you hear the number 31, or if they're asking you to cut taxes, we encourage you to be a public education voter and decline to sign those initiatives. Another way that you can get ready to be a public education voter this fall is all school districts across the state will have a school board election. And we know that these decisions that are happening locally about how federal funds are being and stimulus dollars are going to be spent, how schools are going to write, how districts are going to spend their dollars that they get from the School Finance Act, how they're going to empower schools and communities to have a voice in those budget processes. Means it's really important as you're thinking about which candidates you want to vote for in your school board election. Do those candidates commit to taking local and state action for more adequate and equitable funding? And do your candidates understand and support critical race theory or just honesty in education? We're hearing lots in the news and in our communities around pushback to just being able to tell the true and full history of our nation and our history of racism in this country. And one of the ways that conversation is showing up is through budget conversations. Are we going to pay to change our curriculum? Are we going to fund having more diverse teaching force? Are we going to take the time to pay to train our teachers to be more culturally responsive? And so this is not only something that we want to stand up for as advocates for having a more equitable public education system, but we're seeing this conversation show up in the vehicle of funding. And so we want to make sure that folks understand the connection there, and you're ready to ask your school board candidates whether they will be an advocate on these issues. And we're starting to think about a ballot run in 2022. Just like Lisa shared, we know that the federal investment of stimulus dollars is going to start cliffing out or falling away in 2023 and 2024. We saw this happen after the 2008 financial crisis, and we want schools and districts to be able to feel comfortable making the investments in the programs and the staff that our students need to recover and come back even better and stronger after this pandemic. And school districts and schools might be hesitant to spend money on the things that our kids and families need if they don't know if we're going to be able to backfill that money once these federal dollars go away. So there's some urgency to potentially run again a new ballot initiative in 2022. Like Lisa shared, TABOR rebates are going to begin happening next year, continuing to siphon off money that most other states in the country, when their economy booms, get to take advantage of and invest back into their schools, their roads, their infrastructure, and we will be actually just giving that back to predominantly our wealthiest Coloradans. And we are really excited about the passing of Amendment B, but one of the things that means is it's now easier to lower property taxes at the ballot. And so we can expect to see tax decreases on our ballot every year into the future. And we want to run that positive message around why it's important to fund our future and to fund the things that our students and families and educators need. So that wanted to make sure we shared high level where we've been this legislative session, what our advocates took action on, what our legislators were bold enough to do during this pandemic year to say we're going to really keep an eye and be sure that we're fighting for our kids and our families. But there's still work on the table. There's still work left to do. And we're really excited to hear your questions. And so we will go ahead and go into our Q&A. And it looks like we're having a little bit of a hiccup of showing the Q&A piece, but there was one question that was submitted to Slido, but we can also have folks come off of mute or add your questions to the Zoom chat if that's easier. But does anybody have any questions?
There's
the first question, and I'll put it in the chat so folks can see it. And this was from our Slido, is going to be here. Will TABOR rebates have to follow the new 1321 ballot language rules? And Lisa, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The rebates are automatic, or the legislature has control over how they will be distributed. There's a whole waterfall system of, if there's this much money, it goes to these folks. And so the legislature has already decided what that is. Part of it is an automatic reduction of the income tax rate. And so there's no new decisions to be made on those dollars other than the legislature tweaking it as they may. But the voters don't weigh in. The only way the voters can weigh in is to say what they call debrucing. Don't give us the rebates. We want the benefit of this economy to benefit the future, to benefit our communities, our children, our state. So the voters have to be given, somebody has to take the action, the legislature or organizations and coalitions like ours have to give the voters a chance to say, no, we don't want you to, we want you to invest, we want you to take those dollars and help out our communities. So that's the long answer to the short question. The short answer is no, there's no, they'll just happen.
Lisa, if I may, there are 3 triggers. So up to 150 million over the TABOR cap will actually go to the senior property homestead tax exemption. And then if you get up to 350 million, then that's when it triggers a reduction in the tax rate. And then if it gets up to 500 million, that's when we start sending back the rebates.
And I just want to take a minute to thank Senator Zenzinger for that piece of information, but also for everything she did this year, which actually does also include, as I went through the School Finance Act so quickly, it also included an additional $10 million for special education, which is on top of additional money the year before. So a lot of good things did happen, even though we have to look at the context of what has to still happen. But so thank you, Senator, for and I hope you'll chime in with answers to other questions as well.
And then Anne or Annie, if you had your hand raised, feel free to come off a mute or throw your question in the chat. Would love to hear it.
All right, sure. I started to type the question in, but Cody, can you go over how Initiative 2027 hurts our public school, just for the sake of knowing the grand, you know, on the grand scale, and how we can frame it when we explain it to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share a little bit about how it was written and what its intended impact was, and then what the legislature did about it. Regardless of what the legislature did about it, big picture is any reduction in property taxes is going to take away what we call local share, which means the amount of money that's coming actually from our districts to help support our public schools. There's money that comes from the state and there's money that comes locally. So anytime we reduce the amount of money that's coming from our local districts, that means that more is going to have to come from the state. But just like you saw, the next year already, the state budget is actually going to have to refund money. So we're kind of losing money on both ends. So the way that I would best describe it, or the way that I've been talking to folks, is saying in our country, in our state, in our communities, we spend the money that goes to our local schools comes from our local property taxes. And so anytime we reduce that money without replacing it, we're taking away that money from schools. And so that, I think, is the best way to share with friends and family, that if you see Initiative 27, it's taking away money from our local schools, and we want to do the opposite. We want to fund our schools to the level that we know that they deserve. And we are, again, 48th in the state in the amount of property, or country in the amount of property taxes that we have, and we are about $2,200 behind the national average of how much money we spend per student.
in terms of that ranking, to answer Chris's question, we are, I believe, 43rd in the percent of taxable resources that we spend on our schools. So if you look, we're a wealthy state and we don't use that to the benefit of our students. And we're usually around 42nd, 43rd in per pupil funding, just straight up. When you look at it compared to when you regionally adjust or adjust for regional cost differences, we're well over $3,000 behind the national average, and that includes being behind Alabama and Mississippi. There's another question there, Cody, from Natalie, I believe. Will you be sharing more information for us to share about decline to signs since they're already out getting signatures?
Absolutely. We are, now that we know that there are multiple tax reduction questions that'll be coming your way by petitioners, we're working urgently with our coalition partners and with other folks who want to see us defeat these measures to start putting out talking points, things that you can share on social media, things that you can share with your organizations. So we'll be sending that out through our email list, through social media. And so if you're not on our email list yet, or if you haven't liked us on Facebook, if you're not following us on Instagram, those are going to be the first places where you'll hear and see some of those resources. And so I would highly encourage folks to get signed up so that we can keep you involved with and engaged and up to speed on what those resources will look like. But we're working on that earnestly because we know that's something that would be a big support for folks. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions?
One thing that I would like to just mention is that the federal dollars are so critical, and they, although there are strings attached, they really can be used in ways that will make a big difference in students' lives. And one of the things that is required by the federal legislation is input from the communities, real community engagement, and talk about how to spend those dollars. So one thing that we encourage is that in your own district, find your way into, and you can talk with us if you'd like us to help you with this, but to be able to give input on what are the uses of dollars that are really going to be most effective to different communities. I think that engagement of really understanding, we like to talk about it being inclusive budgeting, that the way that every community can use dollars most effectively is to make sure that that all communities are really being listened to about how to spend dollars. So that is another way to be a public education voter, to really support, is to reach out to your school board members. And again, as Cody talked about, we'll be giving you resources to ask your school board members questions. But really, how are you going to engage the community in deciding the best way, the most effective way to use dollars?
Another way that I think just in getting us ready and always being a public education voter is helping other folks in our community, whether that's folks in our school, a community organization we're a part of, a faith institution. We would love to come in and have a conversation with folks about what is going on in your schools. What are you passionate about? What do you want to advocate on? And how does school funding work? So that when folks are hearing these things out in community about trying to be convinced to sign measures that would reduce property taxes, a lot of times people don't make that connection that that's about schools. And so we are definitely here to be able to provide presentations, whether that's coming in and sharing announcements and opportunities, answering questions, or doing a full training on how does school funding in Colorado work. And so I'm going to put our virtual presentation sign up link in the chat as well, if you want to continue to learn more or provide opportunities for folks in your networks to keep learning about this issue as well. Does anybody have, if it's not even a question, do like reactions? What's sitting with you after hearing some of the things that have happened this year, some of the unfinished business left to do, some of the direction we want to head in? Does anybody have any reactions, thoughts, feedback? Even if it's not a question, we're always here to listen.
I have a question, and I'm sorry, and I work for Great Ed, and that's okay too. But I have a quick question. We did a great, and I hope I don't see anybody who was on the call earlier today. Our race class narrative training, excellent work. I'm hoping you guys can look at the recording, but just looking at the decline to sign, what's coming down the pike, what we're seeing. Is there, and you may not be able to answer this, Cody, but maybe somebody on the line can, what can we start talking to people about this? I mean, we talked about, how to get involved, but we really want to, I think, just to make some smart decisions or smart conversation to people to why it's so important that this is something that we cannot do. We have to really see just the bigger picture. And I think people are just so narrow, once you say no taxes, you've lost me. I mean, I'm done. But I think we really need to start talking about this in a way that people are seeing this long term and the impact this is having and how detrimental this is. And this money, this upfront money that we see now is not going to last. And so just really having those one-on-one conversations and talking to people, that's my question.
Great. And Senator Zenzinger, I might ask you to lean in to help me fill in some gaps here. But one of the things that in the last couple of weeks of the legislature, as Initiative 27 was coming up, and we were hearing from folks just some of the challenges of potentially the assessment value rising this quickly after a pandemic, folks coming out, and what can we do about it as a community, as a state, to listen to that need and not create a long-term detrimental impact. And so the legislature passed at the end of the session a temporary reduction to property taxes to try to help folks manage their way out of the pandemic. But what's different about Initiative 27 is that cut, as it's written, would be permanent. And so right now they're talking to folks trying to use COVID as the reason that we need to cut taxes, but what it's actually doing is creating another permanent hole in the bottom of the bucket. And so what we want to do is say, one of the things that we can say is that folks are already going to see a temporary reduction in their assessed value and their property taxes. So there is relief that's on the way while we still have these federal dollars. But what's concerning about Initiative 27 is it's written to be permanent. Let's just keep hacking away at the tax base. And so that those who can continue to raise more funds or find their way to work around these rules will do it. But when a lot of communities can't pass mill levy overrides, don't have that tax base to be able to make this up. And so there is some relief coming. That's another thing to share with folks. You don't need to sign Initiative 27 to get support. That support is coming. But what Initiative 27 would do is make that permanent. And we know that that'll have a long-term impact on our kids.
There was a bill at the very, very end of session called Senate Bill 293 on property tax classification and assessment rates. And that's what Cody, I think, was talking about preemptively getting ahead of Initiative 27. So it does do a temporary smaller tax reduction, whereas Initiative 27 would be permanent and across the board. It does that through a couple of different ways, but the most important thing that it did is it reclassified the different categories of property, and that's how it kind of interrupts Initiative 27. And so that was intentional. It will signal about a $50 million reduction in general fund for next year. But that was intentional to try and get ahead of a potential 250 million permanent general fund reduction, which is what Initiative 27 is going to do. So it wasn't great. It obviously wasn't ideal, but it was pretty clever in that by passing that bill, reclassifying these different tax properties, it means that Initiative 27 will only apply to like hotels, like a bed tax or things like that. It won't apply to all the different categories because we redid the categories. And their initiative had already been placed on the ballot that way. So it essentially undermined and made a large portion of Initiative 27 null and void. But it will still apply to some of the categories that, but not all of them. So that's just a little bit of a background. It was pretty complicated, and it did come down at the end of session. And it was very concerning because initially in the fiscal note, it showed a $50 million reduction to schools. And we were thinking, like, what are you doing? But it was in an effort to try and get ahead of what could potentially be a $250 million reduction to schools.
And I would just
so it's Senate Bill 293 if you want to take a look at it online.
What these two, 27 and 31, do is gives us an opportunity to change the narrative about, you know, as Lee said, there is this visceral reaction that people have sort of learned over years of taxes, how to react to taxes. What we want to do is change the narrative. What 27 intended to do, it won't do it now, and they still seem to be putting it on the ballot, even though it will not have its original intended impact because of Senate Bill 293. But what we can say is there's 27 and 31 are an effort by folks who there is no service cut that they don't love. They are the folks who are not concerned about paying our teachers well and making sure every student gets what they need. These are people who are interested in keeping as much money in the pockets, you know, this tax cut, the property tax cuts, it always is of greatest benefit to those who have the most. And so what the idea is to just start having people think not about, you know, that shall taxes be raised language that is required by TABOR that Ben mentioned, but to think, what is it we're doing together? What will a tax cut do to our budgets, whether it's at the state level or a local level? You know, what is it that we want to do together? And that's what public education is about. And so that having 27, even though it's not going to be, if it passes, it's not going to be as bad as it would have been. It's still worth having those conversations. And when you go and you see somebody at King's and you start asking them questions, other people start listening to you. And there's like, well, what would that do? So that would take $400 million out of the general fund. Like would that hurt education? That sounds like it would really hurt education. We have to, this is our way. This is a concrete opportunity to have those conversations with folks, to start thinking what we do together is, you know, taxes make it possible for us to invest in the things that make our communities thrive. So even though 27 is not going to be as bad as it was, it's still a decline to sign. It's about what do we do together. Let's see.
Hi, this is Ernestine Garcia. Can I make a request?
Sure.
I'm a retired elementary school principal, and I want to start off with thank you so much for all the work your organization has done. Thank you for the presentation tonight. You really made it simple and easy to follow, and I got it and I understand it. And my request is if it would be possible to have you develop a Facebook post. I can hit more friends and start more of a conversation. If you can, you know, send me a Facebook post and then I post it and then everybody's resharing it. And even if it was as simple as decline to sign 27, a cut in property taxes, just a different way to say, you know, a cut in my local schools, you know. So thank you. And that's my request.
Great. Absolutely. We are working on social media posts that we can share, hopefully some visuals that can help grab people's attention, talking points and actual fact sheets about the impacts of these bills. So we'll be continuing to push that out, or starting to, I shouldn't say continue, because you haven't missed anything yet, but we're starting to work on that with our coalition and get that out to folks. So that'll be coming shortly. And we'll make sure we have the email addresses for everyone who registered for this event. So thank you for doing that. So we can make sure to do a special follow-up with folks who are here tonight. So you get that as well. And we had a great question that was kind of our final question, Slido, and I'll apologize for holding on to it till the end, but wanted to leave folks in these last couple of minutes with what can I do today to take action? Start sharing that news with folks, because again, I actually, and serendipitously, was asked to sign Initiative 27 an hour and a half ago when I was coming back from my grocery store before this event. And so it's happening here in Denver, across the state. And so even at just a text message or a phone call or a Facebook post that talks about saying no and declining to sign on Initiative 27 and 31 can help us start getting the word out while we get those materials ready. Over the course of this summer, once we learn more about the Interim School Finance Committee, we'll be sharing opportunities for you to share your voice with that committee of 8 legislators who are going to be talking about how do we fix the way that we collect revenue? How do we more equitably spend that money so that it goes to the things that our students and our educators need and deserve? And so we'll show you opportunities and share with you how you can influence that process, how you can get involved. And then we will also, there were some great questions in the chat that unfortunately we didn't have a chance to get to, asking us what some of the things we were considering if we were going to go again to the ballot in 2022. And one of the things we want to start doing over the course of this summer is listening to community around our ideas. And so when we have a sense of what some of those ideas are, be looking for opportunities to give us feedback on some of the options that we're considering for a potential ballot initiative in 2022. And so those are the 3 things that you can be looking for. Right away, tell folks to decline to sign those tax reductions. Be ready to be a public education voter in your school board election and at the legislature during the interim committee this summer. And be ready to share your voice on how you want us to take action in 2022 in our next ballot. So with that, I'll see, Lisa, did you have any either final closing words or final thoughts that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Only a thank you to all of you who are taking the time to find out what happened in the legislature and to dedicate this time to school finance. We're always very grateful. And we appreciate any help that you can give us in connecting the dots for folks, and all the links here to ask for a presentation, etc. As Cody has pointed out, when people are talking about their school, they're talking about class sizes that are too big, or teacher shortage, or the things that affect their child today. And most people don't say, so I'm going to start working for fiscal reform. That's a lot of dots, but the only way that we're going to create the schools that we need for the future is if we come together and do this. That's what TABOR requires. We're the only ones who can do it. And so if you can help be translators to folks when you hear concerns about teacher pay or whatever it is, ancient technology, help us connect the dots for folks. Give us that opportunity. In the future, you can even give presentations, but just helping your friends understand that what we do together is so critical, and every one of us is a tax policymaker in Colorado. So we got to give folks that opportunity and help them understand it. So just that is a very long way of saying thank you, and let's do this thing.
Yes. So I will stick on the call if folks have any specific questions that you want to ask, or if you just want to chat, say hi, or if there's still something you're sitting with before you head off. Nicole Shea, I think we can shut the recording off, and I'll just